Welcome to the Best Gay Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Hoppe. Today's episode is about liberation. Fun fact, before it was called a Pride Parade, each year our communities would gather to commemorate the 1969 Stonewall riots in New York City with a march, and we called it a Gay Liberation March. Liberation was our way of saying as a community to straight people, we're not changing for you. 2 kids and a white picket fence? No thanks. We don't want that life. Gay liberation dreamed of a radical future where we didn't depend on marriage for access to health care or basic civil rights. Crazy ideas, right? Today's guest knows a thing or two about liberation. I've known Alex Garner for almost 20 years. We even co-wrote a play together called The Bottom Monologues. Right? It's amazing. You should check it out. He has never compromised his radical sex politics in the service of anyone else's comfort level, and I truly admire that. Today, Alex is bringing his uncompromising radical sex politics to his work with Impact Global, spreading the word and raising awareness about gay men's health and queer men's health in a way that is truly sex positive. And he's doing this around the world, from Mexico to Taiwan. Let's listen in. Alex Garner, welcome to the Best Gay Sex Podcast.
Thanks so much, Trevor. I'm happy to be here.
I am thrilled to have you here. You have been at the forefront of gay men's sexual health activism and thinking in my mind for many years now. But for folks who don't know you, tell us a little bit about kind of where you're from and the work you do now.
Sure. So I grew up in Southern California near Los Angeles, and I've been working as a community organizer, activist since the early 90s when I was 21. I'm now 52 almost, so I've spent my entire life working in some element of queer organizing and HIV in particular for queer men of color. I'm been positive for 28 years now, and that also has informed a great deal of the work that I do, in particular how to represent and advance the issues that are important and unique to queer men living with HIV. And I'm a writer as well. I've written articles, a couple of plays with some interesting collaborators.
Bottom monologue, yes.
Shout out to the Bottom Monologues. And currently I work for Impact Global. Impact is a global health and human rights organization focused mostly on gay, bi, queer, trans folks' rights and health. So happy to be here and talk about this exciting topic, which I'd love to talk about.
Yes, the best gay sex. Everybody loves gay sex. So you grew up near Los Angeles. When you say near Los Angeles, what proximity are we talking about?
So I grew up in the Inland Empire. So most people probably know what that means, i.e., if you will. And then left there when I was 18 to go to college at UCSD. Spent 8 years in San Diego, and then the 25 I moved to Los Angeles, to West Hollywood, the heart of gayness.
Yes.
And it was also a really, really good way to sort of exciting time to have gay sex in the 90s as a 25-year-old in West Hollywood. It was fantastic.
And were you a little queer boy before you came to West Hollywood, or was that part of your sexual kind of awakening?
I was very much a little gay queer boy before I came to West Hollywood. I came out 91, 92. So I was 20 years old in San Diego. Was president of our, back then it was called LGBA, the Gay and Lesbian Association. So I was out and an activist before I moved to West Hollywood, but West Hollywood certainly allowed me to dive face forward into the sort of sexual culture of Los Angeles. The straight culture was also happening at a time that I was a part of. and I was doing sex work then too. And so sex was an enormous part of my experience in those early years of West Hollywood. And it was back then when you could like walk down the street and a car would pull over and say, "Hey, where are you going?"
I was thinking about that. So how would you typically meet guys back then? Like what was the sort of protocol?
So it was right when the advent of the internet was happening. So I think back then you had the traditional ways. So I went to a gay gym, which was in the middle of West Hollywood. It was men only. It was super, super gay. You could work out with your shirt off. They had an enormous sauna steam room area where, of course, everyone was fooling around. They had a pool and a jacuzzi. And then they had a tanning area on the roof, which was clothing optional. So you can imagine how that was. It's great to have a good workout and then sort of get relief afterwards.
And is that kind of like public play, has that always been part of your repertoire? Has that changed over time?
That's always been part of my repertoire, and I think I actually have thought it was so ingrained in me that before I even came out as gay, but I was starting to have sex with men, and I was at UCSD. For some reason, I knew this. Maybe it was genetic gay knowledge. I don't know, but I knew that if I went to an adult bookstore, I could meet guys and have sex with them. And there were adult bookstores that were quite popular in San Diego at that time that I could go to and meet guys. So that element of sex and cruising was really sort of integral to my development. And we also had one of those bathrooms that was notorious for their glory holes. So notorious, in fact, that it was listed in the Damron Guide, and people still don't know what it is.
Like photos for gays, yeah.
And so it was really popular. And I don't know how I knew that it was there. But I knew that it was there, and I went there, and so that style of sex and cruising has always been special to me, I guess, would be a sweet way to describe it. But certainly also informs the pleasure and fulfillment that I get around sex, because I from the very early age, I wasn't ashamed of it, and I understood why it was fun and exciting to me.
And what's special about it? You say special.
Well, it holds a special place, like, in my heart for me, I guess, as that little young gay person who was just discovering how sex worked and how cruising worked and how you look at someone to indicate that you're interested, or how you respond to them, and how you use your body, all of those sort of nonverbal cues that we have to master in a cruising setting. It amps up the excitement. When the time comes that you sort of, if you use hunting as the metaphor, you sort of find the thing that you want, and you think that they're hot and they're interested in you, and then you have this intense sexual connection, and all of that dance beforehand helps make that sexual connection, for me, all the more powerful and pleasurable and fulfilling.
And do you remember your first time cruising?
Gosh, it was long ago. It was very long ago. I remember elements of around the first times. Like, I remember, in particular, being at the college. It was elaborate. The science building, it was in the basement. It was very active. And I remember this one time in particular where there were like multiple guys in the bathroom at the same time at the urinal cruising in the stall. It was like a porn. At the urinal cruising, in the stalls cruising. Someone was literally sort of standing with their back against the door as sort of making sure we knew that someone...
The watchman, yeah.
And it was one of those old-fashioned buildings where they have the there's like a door that you enter, and then there's a little bitty sort of vestibule, and then another door. So you could always hear the first door and know that someone was coming in. Gays, we have it all figured out.
Yeah, the architecture of cruising, I love it. Is this something you did your friends at the time, college friends, know that this was something you were doing, or is this like a...
No, I hadn't come out yet, and so no one knew I was doing it. When I came out, I still did it. Like, I've never been this type of person. I've never really held strongly to this belief that like cruising in public sex is only for people who haven't sort of embraced their sexuality fully.
Sure.
That devalues the act of it, right? So after I came out, I still did it. In fact, I did probably more of it because I didn't have any concern that someone might bump into me and figure out who I was, blah, blah, blah. I went to other bookstores. Like I usually only went to the one that was close to the university. But then I discovered, oh, there's these other places. And I talked to friends about going to these places. I had a friend that I would sometimes go with, right? And it was sort of,
Really?
yeah, it was fun because we were part of the currency attached to cruising in these public sex spaces is masculinity, of course. And so I understood how to fabricate my masculinity to get what I want.
Right.
And it always amused me sort of how people would respond to what I would feel was a sort of obviously inauthentic masculinity. The friend that I would go with was also exactly like me, even physically. We sort of were the same, and he was a big girl, a big queen, and so it was always sort of funny to see us transform the minute we passed through those little plastic things that came in, those bookstores, because we knew how to use our masculinity to get what we wanted, right? It's just that we all have our tricks in our bag.
Yeah, it was a way. I was just curious, like, what are those tricks? Like, what is the fabrication for you? I mean, you are what, 6'4"? Yeah, people watching cannot tell that, but that's part of the effect, right? Is height, I think, adds to the element. Kind of broad-shouldered, but so there's physical attributes, but like, obviously you're talking about something that's more performative.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, even right now, I move when I talk. I use my hands when I walk. I walk in what has always been considered a gay way. So if I have to be masculine, then I lower my voice or talk as little as possible. I move as little as possible. I don't move my hips. I change my gait in terms of how I walk. All of those things, and it creates a certain mystique if you're sort of moving less and talking less. It creates a little sort of distance, intrigue, or whatever. So I figured out I knew how to do that. I don't do it obviously in my daily life, but if I need to get what I want, we all do that. Like if you go to the supermarket and you have to be nice to someone.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't really want to be nice to them, but you have to. Like, yeah, of course, it's always performance, right? We are always sort of moving through, and I think that rubs up against this idea of authenticity today that people are like so invested in, and it's like, okay, well, there are limits to that. But I guess I wonder. I'm just curious because you use that word inauthentic, an obviously inauthentic manifestation of masculinity, right? Do you ever wish you could be desired without that?
I think that I am.
Yeah, right? Like, of course.
I think that there are plenty of people who desire. I think there are people that are actually attracted to what I would consider my feminine side, right?
Yeah.
I think actually part of it, and this is where I sort of feel affection towards it, I think part of it is a game. And I understand it's a role that you play, and it's a game that you play. It's sort of stepping onto, into the spotlight or onto the stage. And how it works. And like I said, we do the same thing. Like if we're talking to our ticket agent and we hope that they're going to upgrade us to first class, right? You create something to get what you want. And I think that when it comes to sex, as long as I'm in on the illusion, then it's not sort of confining me or controlling me. And if I can see it as sort of ridiculous and laughable, then it's not sort of going to feel oppressive to me. It's just something that I can use to get what I want. And it also doesn't, I think when it comes to sex, what will frustrate me is this idea that men will often expect me to play a particular role sexually. Like they really want like a super dominant masculine guy who's gonna like f them really hard and choke them, and and I never really get into that. It's so much work. And so that's I think would be the only frustration, is that they come to believe it so much that they expect certain things as a result.
Yeah, isn't that funny? This is a theme that keeps coming up. Is just this like this inability for people to detach from the fantasy. They're like so invested in the fantasy that they think the fantasy is reality, and it's like, babe, of course it's not reality. Like, what are you thinking? Can you think of a time where like that has really gone south, where like you just feel like there was this complete disconnect between what someone wanted from you and what you were wanting to offer them?
I mean, I think the best example would be I remember I met this guy. He was like super cute, hot, I would say, super hot, and I was like, oh, really into like having sex with him. And we met up over to his place. I was living in DC at the time, and when I met him in person, he was even hotter than I expected him to be. But he was into role play. And
Mm-hmm.
so he was so invested in the role play that after 5 minutes, I just wanted to say, scene, bring the curtain down, let's stop, take a break. Because he was like, he had this elaborate fantasy in his head. I was his dad, he was my son, I was
Mm-hmm.
having sex with him, we shared the secret, no one could know, we couldn't tell mom, it was only our
Oh.
little secret, mom couldn't know. And then from there, it was this idea that he had constructed that we had a cabin in the woods that I would take him to and we would have sex there. And then I would invite all my other adult male friends over and they would have sex with him too. And it was so elaborate that I was just exhausted that it's too much.
Yeah,
See,
I mean, I guess maybe if it was a sex work context and this was someone paying you, then there might be some kind of.
precisely.
But yeah, that's kind of a lot to ask of someone you've just met. Like, hey, could you? Wow, that had so many nooks and crannies with the mom and the cabin. That's interesting. Uh, would you feel differently about that if that was a client?
Oh, well, yeah, if it's a client, then it's performance. I
Hmm.
mean, this whole notion of masculinity is currency when it comes to being an escort, right? I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
the biggest things that clients wanted, at least back then, big dicks, masculine, controlling. I mean, those were the things that they would pay a higher premium for. It's also supply side economics at the end of the day.
Yep.
And so if a client wants that, then of course I can do that for an hour and I can pretend and perform to be the most interested person in the world.
Right. For a price. Exactly. No,
It's
yeah.
always
I
for a price.
Yeah, I get that totally. So, uh, you know, it sounds like a lot of people have expectations of you being a top. Is that like something, a term you relate to, identify with? How do you feel about that term? How do you feel about these categories generally?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of classic in terms of these categories, sort of in that 70s, Lou Hanky sort of way. So
Mm-hmm.
I call myself a top and I put top in my profiles and blah, 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 blah. I also understand the sort of ridiculousness of it. Like it's just an indication of the fact that I will want to be the one, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything else, or it shouldn't mean
Right.
anything else. And but it of course comes with expectations in terms of people who want to have sex with you. And been living in Mexico City for the last few years, and so it's always funny to get like a message on Grinder or something, and the first thing they say is "I macho," right? That's what they
Mm.
want. um, and I can, at certain times I can be in that mood, but I want to do it when I want to do it, not when they want.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's something you've learned over time? Like only doing it when you want to do it, or?
Certainly, I mean, I think I've learned it. I've learned to sort of. I hate to use this sort of phrase or term, but I've learned to sort of set my boundaries in terms of what I will and
Yeah.
won't do. Whereas if I was 21 years old, it's just so much easier to do it. Even if I don't feel like doing it, I'm still going to have a good
Sure.
time.
Right. The mechanics are different. Absolutely. Yeah. Using it
Exactly.
hard at, oh my God, yeah, exactly. I can understand that. Um, Before we get to the best sex, I guess I'm curious about the sort of learning process, and so I was trying to sort of think about how you learn to set those boundaries. And I guess if there were some experiences where that were transformative in terms of like like this was really bad. I need to course correct in the future.
I mean, I think that when I think about any sex that I would consider really bad, I don't think it was, I think it was more circumstantial than anything else, or maybe communication. And so you sort of you learn immediately. It's less of a course correction and it's more of a sort of little tweak, right? I think that the things that, I think the two things that informed my sexual development the most were sex work and HIV, being HIV positive. Sex work because it helped me really distinguish between sex that was for work and sex that was for my fulfillment. And that was valuable because most of us don't have to think about that. And so it forced me to say, this is recreational sex and this is work sex, and they're different, and I can enjoy them in different ways. And there were times, certainly many times, when I was doing sex work and I enjoyed it with the person.
Sure.
In a different way. But it helped me really have to think about what I consider pleasurable and fulfilling sex.
Yeah, because you're using your time to find that, so you want to like get what you want out of it. What's the difference for you in terms of? I mean, it sounds like the sex work stuff came with that baggage of expectations. And
well, it reminds me of the bottom monologues because one of the characters that I created was Big Dick Escort. Right. And so he had a whole sort of sex life as a dominant top with his big dick, but his real fulfilling sex life was at the bottom. And my sex life was still as a top. But it was sort of my relationship to the person that I was with, my relationship to my body, and the sex that I found satisfying, recreationally. That was I think the big difference, because when you're doing sex work, it's so much about, oftentimes it's like, how can I just get this over with? And there were great clients that would be done in 15 minutes.
Right.
And they just want you to come. And so then you're like focusing on the end results, right? So you get there, you know that you're done, hours over, they pay you and they leave. And so in that sense, it's so transactional, not in a bad way, but it's so transactional that it helps you sort of have a clear sense of it. Whereas if it's sex that you're having just to enjoy, then you can relax and you can sort of explore and you can sort of, there's a dance and a rhythm to it that you can lean into, that when you're performing it, it's just not the same.
Yeah, like sort of letting your hair down, so to speak.
Yeah, that could be a good way to describe it.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Like, there's not, you're not in your head as much about thinking about, as you say, the end result or time, especially, I'm sure, as part of it. You're identifying as a top, you're having these experiences, and you say that bad sex for you was circumstantial. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's also difficult to define what bad sex is. Like, did I have a bad time? Did we stop midway through? Did what, there's always different things. Were they bad kissers? I think for me, fundamentally, if like I'm with someone and they're a bad kisser, then I'm like, oh, and I just can't. That's for me, that sort of bar about sex has always sort of been set around, I mean, kissing is probably one of the most important indicators, but it's also the sort of sense of passion. Like, you don't want to, what's the expression, wet fish or whatever. So I think that for me has always been a good way to sort of indicate what the sex is going to be like with them. And then I think, when I think about bad sex, sometimes I want to be careful about describing the word bad, because it's not about the person per se, right? So like,
of course,
if you have a sexual experience with someone and, shit happens, it's no one's fault, of course, but it can break the mood.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a bad experience, and sometimes you can have a bad experience at that. It really, really breaks the mood.
We're talking literally happens here, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
And so that's just par for the course, but it can make things, it can make the experience sort of come to an abrupt end.
Right. Yeah.
Other than that, I think sexually, and this is where I sort of try to suss this out when I'm meeting people. I think the other thing that I tend to prefer is someone who's experienced, right? And so someone who knows what they want, someone who knows what they're doing. The thing that will annoy me the most in sex is when someone either gives me direction or asks a lot of questions. Like, are you enjoying this? Can I do this for you? Should I do this? I feel like those things don't need to be articulated if you're good. You can figure them out, right? And so I think that helps me understand. Like, if I have sex with someone, I don't even care if we speak the same language or not. You have a connection with them, you don't need to say a word in terms of knowing where the sex is going to go and how you can make them feel good and how they can make you feel good. That for me becomes certainly fits into the category of some of the best sex because it's so physical. It's so much about chemistry and pleasure.
So it sounds like part of bad for you is someone's inability to read your body language and kind of vibe. I'm like, God, am I using that word? But it's real, like it's a thing. And when the vibe isn't there, or when someone just can't feel the pulse, I guess.
Yeah. They just sort of want to lay there. Like, I there are times when I'm in the mood for like a lazy bottom, but usually I'm not, right? And sometimes I want to be a lazy top. It's been a long day. And so,
absolutely.
But there are often people out there who are more than happy to comply.
Right.
So that's
that's a hot word right there.
Precisely. So that's not the big issue. I think for me, as we've been talking for weeks about this sort of idea of best sex and good sex, especially when I've had 30 plus years of gay sex, it's hard to put my finger on one or two. It's always so dependent upon the circumstances of my life at that time or the circumstances of that sex. And I think there are certainly some that immediately come to mind, right? Some of it has to do with sort of the sex that you have, like when you're in ecstasy and you're dancing at a circuit party all night long and then you go home and have sex with someone. And it's certainly enhanced because of the ecstasy and because of your attraction to them and you're like in love with them for that 12 hours, whatever.
Yeah, it can create this heightened experience for sure.
But I think the important thing in that part, in terms of sort of love, right? I think that you can love someone for 30 minutes.
Sure.
And have the sex that's the most intense, incredible. I don't like to qualify it and say you're in love with them, but I think we need to sort of expand our context of concept of romantic love because it's so heteronormative. And I could love someone I met in the subway and have sex with, in the bathroom and never see them again.
Yeah. Well, it's like we need 17 words for love or something, like whatever. People say I can't remember what other language has many more words, but the old saying. Yeah, definitely. There's kismet. I don't know what the word is. We don't really have a language. There's some kind of connection that can form that is. What is it? I don't know. It can, as you say, can heighten the experience. It can just creates this intimacy. And even that sounds heteronormative to me. It sounds like
I use that word as default, but it's also so heteronormativity sort of values certain words like love and intimacy,
right?
And we're sort of confined by our language, and so maybe that's sort of our next project is to figure out better ways to describe these things. But I think part of that connection, going back to the other part, is part of that connection, particularly in the 90s and early 2000s, was around HIV. And so it's so difficult to articulate or for people to understand what it means to meet someone when you're positive who's also positive and have sex with them. Particularly before PrEP and undetectable were as common as they are today.
You mean positive
Because
people had sex back then? Oh my God. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I people often don't understand that yeah, exactly. Sorry, continue. Yes.
No, I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Part of it is advancing this narrative that not only were we having sex and lots of sex and good sex and sex parties and all these sorts of things, but it became this extra sense of connection when you could find someone who was also positive. And also, often that would translate sexually into not wanting to use condoms. Right. And so not wanting to use condoms and coming inside them or semen exchange, all of that sort of stuff, which was forbidden. And in many places still is. Culturally, people still feel that way. To be able to do that, Eric would use the term outlaw, I think, sometimes to describe that sort of sexual.
Eric Rofus, our friend and
Eric
late
Rofus,
mentor, yeah.
And so this idea of sort of being a sexual outlaw in that context, I think, also contributed to feelings around sex. But I think that there's also every positive person sort of has this moment or multiple moments experience where you meet someone and they're like, I'm positive. And you're like, oh, me too. And then everything changes, right? Like right before you're about to have sex, that happens. And it's like, it's the lights come on, it's like this hallelujah moment. And that really had an impact on sort of my sexual development, right? To sort of form these connections with other positive guys and have this sort of sex that we were having that we were very much enjoying, even though it was considered bad or wrong or irresponsible. And to, foster this sort of sexual community or sexual positive guys at that time that sustained, to today, I think, for many of them. But I think that certainly helped me better understand what I saw as valuable in the sex that I was having and how I articulated why it was valuable to me as a person living with HIV, not just as my right to have sex that's pleasurable and control my own body, but politically that all sex that we have is political, and to sort of embrace that can also make the sex better because you understand the power of it.
Back then, would you mostly have sex with positive guys?
Yes. So I think before PrEP, almost exclusively my sex partners were other positive guys. And if you were negative, I wouldn't even bother. I'm not going to have sex with you. If you wanted to use a condom, get out. So I had
those two things as synonymous?
Not necessarily, but usually, yes. Yeah. Usually it was a positive guy. It was a 90% chance that there was going to be no condoms. And sometimes they would be the ones that won't use it. And there were plenty of negative guys who didn't want to use condoms, but I sort of didn't want to bother with them. So that was I think the big distinction. And then PrEP happened, and all of a sudden I started having sex with negative guys that I'd never had sex with. And so that simply sort of expanded my field of opportunities.
So what is it about? I think people, I have an understanding of probably what you're looking for, but just to put a pen on it, because I'm curious, like condomless sex, what is different for you?
I mean, so most basic part of it is just sort of the feeling that you have sensation-wise when you're having sex with someone, and it's skin to skin as opposed to condom. That makes an enormous impact in my ability to enjoy it. It also impacts if you're a top, your ability to sort of be as hard as you want to be. And to be able to them and come inside them is radically different than just coming inside a condom.
Yeah, what is it about that? Basic. What's coming inside someone? Because I'm just curious, like, what does it mean to you?
I mean, it's one of my favorite things to enjoy too.
Yeah.
And I think the meaning is really sort of that moment when you're with someone, literally inside someone, And that moment of sort of climax, and they're responding to it. Some bottoms swear that they can feel it and all of these sorts of things, right? Some bottoms say no. That's a whole school debate.
Yeah, yeah. It's not always, I guess, in my experience, but yeah.
But they respond as if they do, right? So whether it's
Oh,
performance or
sure.
not,
Yeah, of course. You always say you can. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that moment when you're sort of so uniquely and supremely connected to someone makes it great. And I also think that, at least for me, even if I'm witnessing that moment, right? Like if I'm watching a bottom get and someone's fucking me, like that to me is incredibly exciting and pleasurable. I don't need to be the participant per se if I enjoy looking at it, or if I'm part of that group, if you will. There's a group activity happening. But it has that moment of connection that becomes heightened because of it.
Do you think that heightened nature is because of the history of HIV around that, or something else?
I think that it's sort of innately physical, chemical, animalistic at its core.
Mm-hmm.
But it's impossible to detach 40 years of HIV from that.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm sure it has had some impact, subliminally, if you will, in terms of our relationship to that. But I think at the end of the day, it really is this sort of animalistic, chemical, physical
pheromones kind of thing.
Yeah.
Animalistic. Yeah, I hear that. I have friends who, the whole language around it, getting people pregnant, it's so funny because obviously we're not getting pregnant, right? But but that they're speaking to something. I don't know, some kind of base desires. Yeah, I hear that. I don't know what it is either. Like there's just something root chakra kind of fundamental stuff happening.
Yeah, it's also the sort of breeding culture, right? That's a big part of it. And that feels very animalistic, maybe in an animal husbandry sort of way.
Yeah, totally. Definitely. I have friends who like joke about like, about like the way that someone else's dick is shaped is like, oh, it's built for like getting as deep in there and like coming and like they go into this deep level of fantasy about it that is fascinating to me. And I get it. It can be hot. But as someone who's been worked in the HIV field, right, I like that's the lens I see this stuff through fundamentally. But then, I'm trying to like put that aside, and I think PrEP has given it, and U equals U has given us the tools to put that aside and think about these other meanings that are not dependent on health, I guess.
Well, I think that's the challenge, and I would say that's certainly my quest. Is how do we recenter sex so that sex is about pleasure and my fulfillment and my connection with a person, and not about HIV and not about risk and not about health. And I think this is where being positive allows us that experience. That negative men will never experience because they're negative. But as positive people, we have the benefit of having been negative at some point, and then having been positive at some point, knowing the difference. And when you never have to worry about HIV again, then the sex that you're having is just about the sex that you're having in the way that gay men did before HIV. And that can radically transform your relationship to your sex and sexuality and what you find pleasure in. And how you articulate what you want and how you have all these connections, because you never have to worry about getting HIV.
Do you remember having sex for the first time after you seroconverted?
I don't remember if it was the first time, but it certainly was in the first months after. I think I probably went to a sauna, and I wanted to have sort of a buffet of sexual experiences.
A Vegas buffet, baby.
Exactly, all you can eat. So for me, it was really like, oh my God, now the floodgates can open and I can sort of dive into this pool and do that. Was that I distinctly remember. The act itself, I probably don't. But the idea that now I can do this and now I can have this sort of sex with guys that I really was having before, but it was so caught up in fear and anxiety. But now I could have the sex, and that's where this liberation narrative comes in, because getting a positive diagnosis with HIV is liberating. You don't have to worry about getting HIV ever again, and your sex can just be the sex that you're having. And as perverse as that might sound to people, there is an overwhelming sense of liberation attached to testing positive, and it's almost entirely around the sex that we're having.
Do you think negative guys on PrEP now come close to that?
Certainly, I think negative guys on PrEP approach it, right? They get to like the 10-yard line, if you will. But it's something that they'll never be able to do, right? You just can't do it until you've got there. But that, for me, that was always the most attractive thing about PrEP. I was less interested in the sort of prevention narrative, the sort of prevention narrative that started around PrEP, and I was more interested in the idea of like,
wait, it's a bullshit. It does work, right?
Well, that bullshit, like it's not true. I mean, like the sort of, the sort of bullshit cliche narrative of like, be a good little gay boy and take your pill because now you can have sex and not worry about HIV, but you should still use a condom most of the time because you don't need an STI. Like that sort of bullshit that came out around PrEP. And for me, I didn't give a shit about communicating that to anyone because it's sort of incidental.
Right.
What I was interested in is like, now you can get to the 10-yard line. Now, as a native guy, you can have the sex that you wanted to have, and you can do these things that you wanted to do. And we've seen that happen, like the explosion of like cum dump bottoms online. There were plenty of them there that were there before that were positive before PrEP, but once PrEP happened, now it's become this thing. And I think I wrote this in an article. There used to be a time when having bareback sex was radical, and now it's an average Tuesday.
It's just sex. Yeah. I mean, does anyone still use the website Bareback RT? Like, I don't even know.
Yeah, it's still up.
Oh, it's still up?
I still have an account.
Yeah.
I still have an account. I check it every once in a while.
Yeah. It's just funny to me because it's like, I mean, it's just, you find that everywhere now. It's not a thing, so to speak. So you've got this, you have this liberation, transformative moment. Hopefully that's a gateway. It sounds like that's a gateway to having your best sex. What does that best sex look like for you?
I've been thinking about this. It's hard. It's such a hard thing to sort of nail down because best can be, it's like going to a restaurant. And that's the best analogy. Food is the best analogy for me because sometimes you go to this fantastic, delicious, wonderful, luxurious restaurant and the best meal you've ever had. And sometimes you've been out all night and it's 3:00 in the morning and you go to Burger King and it's the best meal you've ever had.
Baby. Oh, yeah.
So sex is the same. And I think for me, when I think about the best sex that I've had, I'd probably put them in different categories. One of them is certainly like I can immediately think of sort of sex that I had with someone that I had such an insane chemical attraction to that even like just when we touched each other, even just our fingers, it was like electricity, for lack of a better term. So that the sex was just intense and passionate and hot and all of those sorts of things. And that was great, right? And so that was dependent upon this chemical interaction. And I think probably people would consider the sex that we had pretty basic in the sense it was just like, kissing, oral, and like sort of standard sex, but it was the connection. And then I think that there's sex that happens that I would put in that sort of cruising category where you're like cruising for sex. I was just in Brazil and had sex with this guy that I met at some sex club there. And he was physically, gorgeous in terms of what I want in a guy. And the sex that we had was great. The sort of connection that we had was great. We sort of cruised each other before, and then we went into some cabin, and I can still sort of almost physically sort of have the physical memory of like touching like his chest as I was like him, and its waist, holding his waist, and all of that sort of stuff made it a great sexual experience. And I would put that sort of in that sort of cruising category. And then there's also sort of sex that, like, I can think of like the best couple sex that I had. And that was because, one, I was super attracted to both of them equally, which is rare when you have couple sex.
Oh, not someone you were dating, like you having sex with a couple. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
It was a three-way. There was a couple, and there was me. And so there's always that challenge when you're having sex with a couple, because invariably you'll be more attracted to one than the other.
Right.
And vice versa. And in this situation, it was sort of the chemistry was perfect for all three of us, and it was equally distributed. And while we were having sex, when you're having sex with a couple, so you have to sort of worry about like the dynamics and any of those sorts of things sometimes, who might get jealous and insecure. But I remember with this couple, what made it so good was that seems to not be there. So much so in the sense that, like, I was one guy and the couple was like saying in Spanish, enjoy it. It's really nice. Like, it was really into the fact of like watching his boyfriend getting. It was really into the idea that his boyfriend was enjoying it, right, and supporting that. And I think that heightened the experience because it let free those concerns around like, oh, I'm in a couple and someone's going to feel left out or blah blah blah. That was certainly count as one of my best sexual experiences.
Yeah, those dynamics can always be difficult to anticipate, and it's almost like surprise. Like
totally,
the enjoyment is the surprise that it's actually good. You're like, wow, this is great. I totally can appreciate and understand that. What do you do? What are your like strategies for finding that best sex, whatever category it may be in?
I mean, like my sex strategies now tend to be more. Instead of having them come to me, I go to them. I mean, I don't mean Grindr like in and out. I mean, like, instead of like playing the Grindr game and trying to meet some guy and then like waiting for him to come over, waiting him to be on time and never are.
Yeah.
Getting the prepared or whatever. It's much easier just to go where there's a lot of them, right? Like a Salt Lick or something like that. So a sex
Salt Lick, Lord of mercy.
So like a sex club or a. I know salt is well, I guess literally it is. Literally it is very salty. So it's like a Salt Lick.
So this sex club is the Salt Lick. I got it.
So like a sex club or a sauna or some sort of cruising space where it's easy access to a lot of people at once.
Yeah.
That to me, and as I said earlier, that dynamic has always appealed to me. And then I think part of that dynamic is also the cruising element, and then there's also this sort of going back to this theme of performance, right? When you're in a group public setting, then you can sort of perform and put on a show and be part of that show that's happening, and that can be very pleasurable and fulfilling as well.
A little bit of an exhibitionist.
Yeah, I would say exhibitionist and voyeur. So I certainly like to watch, and I certainly like to know that I'm putting on a show for someone.
Yeah, definitely. So is most of what the sex you find today? Is it mostly through those kinds of spaces, sex clubs, etc.?
Certainly if I'm traveling, like if I'm in a city, like I was just in Brazil, Sao Paulo and Rio, and I'm like, I can sit in my hotel room and get on Grindr and look for a guy, or I can go to a space where there are lots of guys. And so in that sense, it's so much easier when I'm traveling. It's a more direct route to get what I want.
Yeah.
And I think that for me works because sometimes at the end of the day, it's just simply a time saver.
Yeah.
I feel like a working mom, right? It's like my time saving tip.
For listeners who are not in cities with those kinds of establishments, because unfortunately there's a lot of places in the world, especially here in the United States, without sex clubs, like what tips would you have for folks for finding their best sex in those kinds of spaces or without those kinds of spaces?
So I would have two tips for that, and I think one is a more aspirational, and one is more practical. The aspirational one is we have to create those spaces. So I always admire and am fascinated by the idea of a guy that went to a bathroom and created a glory hole. Like, how
Whittled
the
that
fuck
thing in
did
the
you
wall,
do
yeah.
that? How did you do that? Do you have a power tool? Do you need an extension cord? How does that work? I want there to be like there needs to be a podcast or a documentary about how a glory hole is born. Someone needs to do that because it fascinates me. I love the person who did that, who took the time and the energy to do that. So if those spaces don't exist, then we've got to create them.
Get some power tools,
and
baby.
that's aspirational because obviously not everyone can create them, and there are certainly risks that go along with it.
Yeah.
But I think the more practical one is that if there aren't those spaces, then this is where the value and the importance of sexual networks comes in, right? And I think HIV is the most obvious one. But if you're able to create a network of people that you have sex with, whether you call them buddies or whatever, then that saves you the rigmarole of Grindr and looking for something. You've had sex with them, it was good, you know each other. I think that's can often be a good, dependable way, and you have a connection with them in different ways. Those would be my sort of two key suggestions.
Yeah, build the sexual community. I hear that, and that is oftentimes a tip that I have for people too. And I don't know why some people are so averse to it, but I think it seems like, just sort of reading, the many gay men that I encounter, that some people just, maybe they're too scared, or I don't know. But, I don't, maybe they will never have the best gay sex because they can't, because of that fear or something that's holding them back. I don't know. You got to let go a little bit.
This is where I think, for lack of a better phrase, we need like a sexual Sherpa. Because so in sex spaces or in cruising spaces or even like a naked pool party, right? There always has to be someone who starts the sex.
Yeah.
Because there are tons of guys who want to do it and they're afraid or they're nervous and they don't. And then there's always a couple of them that know, like, we're going to start this, we're going to get this to make this happen right now. Those are the sexual Sherpas.
Live for that idea. It's sort of like you got to be the first person on the dance floor if you want, you got to bring people, create the world you want to live in. And so you got to take a risk there. How do you, I guess you just have to just do it. But I think I am not a brave person in that way, but I know I have many friends who are, and I admire that very much, but it takes guts.
I would never call myself brave in that regard. But I certainly have done it. And part of it is there's an excitement to it, right? There's the excitement of being the person who's going to do that and sort of rope people in, and the guy that you're going to do it with, and it's performance, of course. All of that can even make it more exciting and more fulfilling because you're the one sort of leading everyone along, right? And I certainly do it, and I certainly have enjoyed it. And I think the way that you do it is that people just have to sort of dive in, and I guess the pool is the best analogy, is to just throw yourself in. And if you do, and we've all had that experience where we did it and we didn't think we were going to do it, and then we're like, oh my God, it was so fantastic, I did it. And so we have to just, for that moment, overcome that fear or anxiety or nervousness around it, and then you do it, and then you see the nice thing about that is once you see the results, you're more likely to do it again.
Right.
And so that you need to, maybe that's your next podcast, creating sexual sherpas.
I love that. Sexual sherpas. I will take that concept with me for some time, I'm sure, because it's such a fabulous concept. And I hear exactly what you mean. So I always like to end with my favorite segment, Sordid Lives and Untold Tales, slut for short. What's the sluttiest thing you ever did?
Oh, that's so hard because I am a total slut.
You are a slut.
And so what I consider like normal everyday experience, probably the rest of the world thinks is slutty.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I mean, like in an old-fashioned sort of like 80s Dynasty Alexis Collins, Joan Collins, Alexis Colby, form. Like I remember I was 21 years old and I got one of my first jobs writing for a magazine, and had sex with my boss, who was the publisher, on his desk in his office, while his husband was home with their daughter.
Oh my God.
That to me is like old-fashioned Dynasty style slutty sex.
Definitely. That's some soap opera drama right there. And did you get like a promotion out of it?
I didn't get a promotion, but I got more money.
Oh, okay. Get that coin. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think just sharing these experiences and putting them out there and being frank about the real sex we were having is key. So I appreciate your willingness to come with me on that journey today. Thank you very much. If people want to learn more about you and or Impact Global, where can they find you?
So for me, it's Alex Garner LA on Twitter and Instagram, and for Impact, it's Impact Global on both Twitter and Instagram. So yeah, and I would.
And that's just Impact, no
yes,
I.
Sorry, it's MPACT Global. So yes, thank you, Trevor.
Fabulous. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to learning more about sexual sherpas from you in the future.
Thank you, Trevor. I was so happy. It's been a pleasure.
Yay. That's our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. And remember, if you're not having your best gay sex, I can help. My coaching services are designed for gay, bisexual, and queer men to identify and overcome barriers that stand between them and their best gay sex life. Find out more on my website, thebestgaysex.net. Look forward to hearing from you. Till next time.